Sitting in the bustling police station, Mary felt mortified by the entire ordeal. Being arrested for the first time at 70 was not something to be proud of. Yet she found some relief, knowing her long pursuit of the truth was finally coming to an end. In the envelope were the long-awaited test results, holding answers to family mysteries. Mary expected a few surprises, perhaps a niece or nephew, but she wasn't prepared for the revelation she was about to uncover. The discovery would change everything she thought she knew. As she read the report, disbelief overwhelmed her. She checked the results repeatedly, but they told a truth far from what she had imagined. Memories flashed through her mind, and Mary realized that for the past 70 years, she had been living a life built on hidden lies and secrets. But before we start our story, smash the like button, make sure to subscribe and hit the notifications bell so you won't miss any new stories. At 70, Mary had enjoyed her life as a mother and now a grandmother. Yet being abandoned by her mother at a young age, and with her father incarcerated for most of her life, she felt a growing loneliness in her retirement years that left her questioning her past. Though she cherished her family life, with her children grown and grandchildren in college, Mary now found herself with an abundance of free time. This led her to revisit old questions about her childhood and the long-buried mysteries surrounding her biological family. Mary had always wondered why her mother left her and why her father ended up in prison. Raised by her aunt and uncle alongside her sister, she was told that her father was a good man who had fallen into unfortunate circumstances, a story she accepted as a child. This explanation had once satisfied her youthful curiosity, but as Mary moved through life, school, marriage, raising children, she had pushed these questions aside. Now in her retirement, with fewer distractions, she couldn't help but revisit those long-buried doubts from her past. Curious about her identity and her parents' history, Mary turned to Google for answers. Most results suggested taking an ancestry DNA test, which could uncover living relatives and provide information about ancestors and parental lineage, offering the clarity she had long sought. Excited by the possibility of finally getting answers, Mary wasted no time. She contacted a local DNA specialist and booked an appointment for the weekend. The thought of discovering more about her family and herself filled her with eager anticipation. However, there was one condition. The receptionist asked Mary to bring any photographs of her parents she could find. This request made her pause. Why were photos necessary for a DNA test? Yet, assuming it was an essential part of the process, she decided to comply. Mary immediately began gathering photos scattered around her home. She cherished the framed pictures of her life, childhood memories, her wedding, and her children's milestones. But to her disappointment, none of these included photos of her parents. Mary, determined to find the old photographs, remembered a couple of inherited photo albums stored in her attic. These albums held memories of her family and were the source of all her framed photos. They were her only link to her parents, and she knew she had to retrieve them. The attic, however, was not easy to access. The steep, narrow staircase made her nervous, and the attic itself was cluttered with years' worth of forgotten belongings. Mary hadn't cleared it out in ages, reluctant to let go of the past. But today, she had no choice. Thankfully, Mary remembered exactly where the photo albums were stored. She sighed in relief. Searching through the attic blindly would have taken hours. She made her way through the piles of old boxes and finally reached the corner where the albums had been tucked away. She was relieved to have found the albums and thought that her work was done. But she couldn't be more wrong. As she opened the first album, a chill ran down her spine. Several photographs of her father were missing. She flipped through the rest of the pages, hoping the missing photos were just misplaced, but they were nowhere to be found. Her mind raced. Had she forgotten where she'd placed them? How could all the photographs of her father be gone? All the rest of the pictures were intact. Mary was certain those photographs had been there when she first inherited the albums. She had even carefully removed some to frame them, leaving marked spaces where they belonged. But now the empty spots held no markings, and the missing photos sent her into a spiral of doubt. Unsure of what to do, Mary decided to call her older sister. She vaguely remembered exchanging some photos with her sister years ago, hoping her sister might have forgotten to return them. Maybe it was all just a simple misunderstanding, she thought, as she dialed the number. Mary's sister Esmeralda answered the phone quickly, and they caught up on each other's lives. It had been a while since they last spoke. When Mary brought up the missing photos, her sister seemed eager to help, but Mary could sense a hesitation beneath her cheerful tone. Her sister claimed she had returned all the photos nearly a decade ago, though her memory was foggy. She assured Mary she had no reason to keep any of them and hadn't seen the photos in years. But something in her sister's voice didn't sit right with Mary. A growing suspicion gnawed at Mary. Her sister wasn't telling her the whole truth. She could feel it. Pressing her sister further, Mary asked if she was sure she hadn't misplaced the photos or kept them for some reason. That's when the conversation took a sharp turn. "Why do you need those photos anyway? Don't we have enough pictures of our father?" her sister asked, her voice tinged with irritation. Mary hesitated but decided to reveal the real reason behind her search: the DNA test. Without warning, her sister abruptly hung up the phone. Stunned, Mary sat there, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Was it a bad connection? Had her sister hung up intentionally? Or maybe her phone had died. Unable to believe her sister would react so rudely, Mary called back several times. On the fifth attempt, her sister finally picked up, but her tone was cold and hostile. "Mary, don't you dare take that DNA test. You should leave the past where it belongs," she snapped before hanging up again, leaving Mary bewildered and shaken. Mary sat in silence, trying to process her sister's sudden hostility. Why was she so adamant about the DNA test? What was she hiding? Exhausted and confused, Mary decided to sleep on it, hoping things would seem clearer in the morning. Her sister's strange behavior was troubling, but she tried to brush it off as just another one of her sister's moods. After all, they were getting older, and her sister had always been a bit unpredictable. Yet deep down, Mary couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. Mary recalled that even when she and Esmeralda were in close contact, they rarely discussed their parents. Whenever Mary had brought up their family, Esmeralda would swiftly change the subject. Mary assumed her sister's reluctance was due to the painful memories of their father's incarceration and their mother's abandonment. Mary had always understood her sister's pain and respected her boundaries, especially since Esmeralda was older and had experienced their family trauma more directly. At the time, Mary was too young to remember much, but Esmeralda, at 9, had lived through it all. Now, though, Mary felt torn. Part of her wanted to confront her sister one last time before going against her wishes and taking the DNA test. But after their tense phone exchange, Mary knew she had no choice. Esmeralda's refusal only deepened Mary's curiosity. What could be so terrible that Esmeralda was hiding it so fiercely? Despite her sister's warnings, Mary stuck to her plan. She gathered the few photos she had of their parents and headed to her appointment with the DNA specialist. She couldn't shake the feeling that something crucial lay just beyond her reach. At the clinic, Mary was greeted by the head specialist. The process began with filling out forms and providing basic family details. Then, a saliva sample was taken, followed by the need for a blood sample. Everything seemed routine, but Mary's excitement masked the storm brewing ahead. As the nurse prepped her for the blood sample, Mary had time to think. She pulled out her phone and, against her better judgment, sent her sister a message. She attached a picture of the clinic and told Esmeralda she was undergoing the DNA test right now. To her surprise, Esmeralda replied almost immediately. Her message was frantic. "Please, Mary, leave the clinic while you still can. If not for your sake, do it for the family. I beg you." Mary's heart raced. Why was her sister so desperate? Mary tried to get more answers, her fingers trembling as she typed. She asked Esmeralda why she should leave, demanding an explanation beyond vague warnings. But her sister's response was cryptic and frustrating. "You just have to trust me, Mary. I can't explain." Just as Mary was about to respond, the specialist returned. His expression had changed. His face had gone pale, and he held one of Mary's photo albums in his hand. Something was clearly wrong, and the tension in the room became unbearable. The specialist took hesitant steps toward Mary but avoided her gaze, staring at the floor. His hands shook slightly and he struggled to find the right words. Mary felt a chill. "What did you find?" she asked, her voice steady despite her growing fear. Instead of answering, the specialist urged her to leave. Mary's frustration boiled over. First, her sister had warned her off, and now the specialist was refusing to finish the test. "No," she snapped. What's going on? I deserve to know the truth. The specialist remained silent, then quickly turned and left the room. Mary felt her heart pound in her chest. Something was deeply wrong, and everyone around her was hiding it. She followed him down the hallway, hearing the faint sound of a phone call. Peering into the room, Mary caught the specialist's voice as he said, "Esmeralda." The name sent a shock through her. Her sister was involved in this too? What was Esmeralda's connection to the clinic, and why was the specialist so afraid? Anger and confusion surged through Mary as she stormed out of the building. Nothing made sense anymore. How could her sister be involved? And what did the specialist see in that album that made him react like this? This simple curiosity towards finding out about her biological family had turned into a dark family truth that everyone around her seemed to hide. Mary stood outside the clinic, her mind spinning with questions. The lengths to which her sister and the specialist had gone to conceal the truth only strengthened her resolve. Now more than ever, Mary was determined to uncover the truth about her family, and no one was going to stop her this time. Mary couldn't wrap her mind around the fact that the DNA specialist knew her sister well enough to call her immediately after seeing the photographs. How could they have been connected? The realization dawned on Mary. Maybe Esmeralda had been the first to explore their family's dark secrets long before her. It began to make sense. Esmeralda, always the more curious one, could have taken these same steps years ago. The photos she borrowed from Mary could have been used for a DNA test at this very clinic, which explained why the specialist recognized them instantly. But one thing gnawed at Mary's mind. What could the DNA test have revealed that was so devastating? Esmeralda felt the need to hide it from her at all costs. It was a secret that had ripped their family apart, and now Mary was more determined than ever to uncover it. Mary knew she needed another way to get answers. Confronting her sister again was out of the question, and she couldn't trust the DNA clinic. There was only one person she could think of, her niece, Jessie, who was a lawyer. Jessie would value the truth, no matter the consequences. After a long drive, Mary arrived at Jessie's house. Jessie welcomed her with a warm hug, surprised but pleased by the unexpected visit. They caught up on each other's lives over tea, but Mary knew the real conversation was yet to come. When Mary broached the topic, Jessie immediately understood. "It's my mom, isn't it?" Jessie said softly, her expression darkening. Stunned, Mary nodded as Jessie began to explain. Jessie had grown up with stories of their grandparents, heroic tales that had filled her childhood. But as she grew older, she noticed the inconsistencies. The stories changed over the years, and when Jessie confronted her mother about it, Esmeralda became enraged, demanding her daughter's respect and loyalty. Jessie knew something was wrong, and when she tried to search their basement for answers, her mother strictly forbade it. "You've never been in the basement since then?" Mary asked, bewildered. Jessie shook her head. But Aunt Mary, there were so many photo albums down there, you wouldn't believe it." The revelation sent chills down Mary's spine. Could the missing pieces of their family history be there? Mary realized she couldn't drag Jessie deeper into this mess. She stayed for dinner, intending to leave afterward. But to Mary's surprise, when she was ready to go, Jessie grabbed her coat and insisted on coming along. "You're not going alone," Jessie said firmly. Reluctantly, Mary agreed. Together, they drove to Esmeralda's house, knowing that the answers they sought might finally be within reach. The house was dark, no sign of anyone inside. They knocked on the door and called, but there was no response. There was a way in, but it came with risks. Jessie had a spare key. She offered to use it, but Mary hesitated. They both knew this could be seen as breaking and entering, even though Jessie was Esmeralda's daughter. But without a better option, they had no choice. After confirming the house was empty, they made their way to the basement door. To their dismay, it was locked. Jessie suggested finding the key or forcing the lock. As Mary searched the house for a key, Jessie grabbed a screwdriver and hammer, ready to break in. Jessie finally managed to force the lock open, and Mary couldn't help but feel a surge of triumph at the hard-earned victory. However, their relief was fleeting. The moment the door swung open, a piercing alarm shattered the silence, jolting them back to reality. They fumbled to deactivate the alarm, but it was no use. The blaring noise would surely draw attention, and they had minutes before someone called the police. Mary knew they had to make a decision fast. "Jesse, you have to leave," she urged. "You can't risk your career." Jesse protested, but Mary insisted. Jesse finally agreed, slipping out of the house before the police arrived. Alone, Mary faced another choice. She could leave now and avoid trouble, or she could push forward and get the answers she came for. The decision was easy. Despite the alarm, despite the risk, Mary couldn't leave without knowing the truth. She grabbed a flashlight and descended into the basement. Just as Jesse had said, it was packed with photo albums. Mary quickly found the missing photos from her own albums. "But why?" she whispered. Though she found the photos, they didn't answer everything. She kept searching, the deafening alarm making it difficult to focus. Then suddenly, a second beam of light cut through the darkness. A police officer stood at the top of the stairs. "Ma'am, come up here right now," the officer called, his flashlight catching the broken lock. "I'm guessing you don't live here, do you?" he asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Mary tried to play the confused old woman trick in order to get out of being arrested, but the officer wasn't buying it. When the officer didn't find any spare keys with Mary, he arrested her on the spot and led her to the police station. Mary sat silently in the back of the police car, the weight of the night's events sinking in. What had started as an innocent search for her family's past had spiraled into a tragic mess, and here she was, handcuffed, heading to the police station with no real answers. At the station, the officers demanded to know why Mary had broken into the basement. Trying to maintain her composure, Mary blamed her age, brushing it off as a misunderstanding between sisters. She was determined not to drag her family's drama into this mess, especially not in public. The officers, however, weren't buying it. They pressed her for real answers, especially since they found no spare key on her. It was clear she hadn't just wandered in. She either broke in or had help. Mary realized she needed to give them something, but refused to do so without a benefit. With quick thinking, Mary looked at the officer and said calmly, "Let me speak to my sister. She'll come right away if you tell her I broke in." The officer raised an eyebrow, uncertain, but agreed. Just as Mary had predicted, Esmeralda arrived at the station within 20 minutes. The officer escorted Esmeralda into the room, carrying a file of documents under his arm. He placed an old photograph of their father on the table and asked both women to confirm it. Esmeralda's face went pale and Mary's heart pounded. "Yes," they whispered, their voices filled with anticipation. Esmeralda's eyes fell to the floor as Mary straightened up, sensing the moment of truth was near. "What is it, officer?" Mary asked, her voice firm. The officer began explaining how their father's case had once been one of the most discussed in the county, a revelation that left Mary stunned. He went on to detail how their father had been a war hero during the Vietnam War. Mary had always known that her father had gone to prison, but a war hero? She was thoroughly confused but stayed quiet, listening as the officer laid out a story she never expected to hear. During the war, their father had protected a Vietnamese political leader, someone considered the enemy at the time. His efforts had sparked outrage back home. The people in government had labeled him a traitor, despite the fact that his actions had been for a greater cause. Unable to endure the constant harassment, their mother had left them with their aunt and uncle. Mary's heart sank as she heard the officer explain how their mother, tormented by the label of being a traitor's wife, could no longer bear the weight of public scorn. Mary's mind raced, trying to reconcile the image of the father she barely knew with the story now unfolding. She glanced at Esmeralda, who seemed paralyzed by the weight of the officer's words, her face drained of color. Tears welled in Mary's eyes as the realization of their mother's torment washed over them both. The officer continued, revealing that the leader their father had saved had played a crucial role in establishing peace between the two armies. Though their father was released from prison years later, the damage was done. The public still saw him as a traitor, and his reputation remained ruined. The cruel treatment from society took its toll. Shunned, unable to work, their father faced rejection and isolation at every turn. The relentless bullying and inability to rebuild his life pushed him into substance abuse, leading to his tragic death, a fate far worse than prison itself. Mary sat in stunned silence, the weight of the truth sinking in. Esmeralda had known this all along but chose to shield Mary from the painful reality, hoping to protect her from their family's tragic past. The burden had been too much for Esmeralda to bear alone. Tears welled up in Mary's eyes as she turned to her sister. "You should have told me," she whispered, her voice breaking. Esmeralda, equally emotional, responded, "I didn't want you to suffer like I did." They embraced, tears flowing freely, finally sharing the pain that had kept them apart for so long. Despite the sorrow of the story, Mary felt an unexpected sense of peace. Knowing the truth about her father's incarceration brought clarity. For years, she had carried a vague, painful mystery, but now she understood what had happened and why. There was some comfort in that. Determined to honor her father's true legacy, Mary decided to share his story on social media. She poured her heart into the post, recounting everything she had learned, hoping to set the record straight. She wanted the world to know who her father really was. To her surprise, the post quickly went viral. Thousands of people read the story, offering support and understanding. Strangers expressed their sorrow over the injustice her father had faced. The comments, filled with admiration for his bravery and sacrifice, overwhelmed Mary with emotion. Esmeralda, who had been so afraid to let the truth out, sat beside Mary and watched the responses pour in. "I never thought anyone would care," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I always believed people would still see him as a traitor, but now they see him for who he was." Mary and Esmeralda received messages from veterans, historians, and even people who had lived through the Vietnam War. Some remembered the political leader their father had saved. The flood of compassion and respect for their father touched them deeply, helping to heal old wounds. The sisters, once divided by the secrets of their past, found solace in the outpouring of support. For the first time in years, they felt the burden of their family's history be lifted. What had once been a source of shame had transformed into something they could now face together. Finally, Mary could breathe freely, knowing the truth had set her and Esmeralda on a path of healing. Their father's story, once silenced in shame, was now a testament to his bravery and resilience. Together, they were determined to honor his memory, not just for themselves, but for the world to see.